It had been an ordinary afternoon, one of those quiet stretches of time when nothing unusual seemed likely to happen. The narrator was at home, enjoying the peace of a slow day, when an unexpected knock at the door broke the calm. Standing outside were not one, but both of their aunts, an occurrence rare enough to make the narrator instantly suspicious. While it wasn't unusual for one aunt to drop by occasionally, seeing the two of them together, side by side, was highly unusual. The narrator's aunts could not have been more different from one another. Aunt Farah was known for her gentle, motherly presence, always soft-spoken and hesitant to share personal struggles. She carried herself with grace, often choosing silence over conflict. Aunt Nadia, on the other hand, was fiery and outspoken, never one to keep her opinions to herself. She was quick to confront anyone who crossed her, and she had a reputation for being the strong one in the family. To see the two of them standing together, both looking strangely subdued, immediately set the narrator's heart racing. When they entered the house, the atmosphere changed. Both women exchanged worried glances as if silently debating who should speak first. The narrator offered them tea, trying to lighten the mood, but their unusual seriousness made it clear that this wasn't a social visit. After some hesitation, Aunt Farah finally broke the silence. Her voice trembled slightly as she said they needed to have a private conversation, one that could not be overheard or delayed. This request startled the narrator. Rarely had their aunts been so insistent, let alone together in agreement about something so pressing. The narrator led them to the living room, shutting the door behind them, and sat down nervously. The air felt heavy with expectation, as if a storm was about to break. Both aunts clasped their hands tightly in their laps, their faces pale and anxious. The narrator's mind ran wild with possibilities. Was this about a family feud? An illness? Some hidden financial trouble? But the look in their eyes suggested something even more personal, something that was weighing heavily on both of them. Aunt Nadia leaned forward, her usual confidence noticeably dimmed. She told the narrator that they had come together because they didn't know who else to turn to. Her words sent a chill down the narrator's spine. These were two women who usually managed their problems in very different ways, yet here they were, united, seeking help. By this point, the narrator could feel their pulse quicken, torn between curiosity and dread. Whatever the reason for their visit, it was clear this wasn't going to be a simple chat over tea. The aunts' eyes carried secrets, burdens they had been holding in for too long, and the narrator was about to become the unwilling confidant. As silence lingered for one tense moment longer, the narrator realized something life-changing was about to be revealed. Something that would pull them into a situation they had never imagined being a part of. The moment stretched in silence after the narrator had settled both aunts into the living room. The narrator's heart pounded with the anticipation of hearing something life-changing, but even then, nothing could have prepared them for what came next. Aunt Farah was the first to speak. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, and she avoided eye contact as though ashamed of what she was about to reveal. With a shaky breath, she confessed that she believed her husband was being unfaithful. The words hung heavy in the room, almost unbelievable. Aunt Farah, the quiet, loyal woman who had always put her family first, was now trembling as she explained the late-night phone calls she had overheard, the unfamiliar perfume lingering on his clothes, and the distant way he now treated her at home. It had been weeks, she admitted, of sleepless nights and doubt eating away at her. Finally, her voice cracked as she confessed she could no longer ignore the possibility that her husband was involved with someone else. The narrator's head spun. Infidelity was a word they had only heard whispered about in other families, but to think it had touched their own was shocking enough. Before they could fully process it, Aunt Nadia cleared her throat and, with her usual boldness, added that she too was there because of the same problem. The narrator turned to her in disbelief. Two women, two sisters-in-law, both sitting across from them with nearly identical suspicions. It seemed almost too coincidental, but Aunt Nadia, unlike Farah, wasn't hesitant in her words. Her tone was sharp, her eyes flashing with anger more than sorrow. She laid out her suspicions with precision. Her husband's late nights at the office, unexplained receipts from expensive restaurants, and his sudden obsession with guarding his phone as if it held a dangerous secret. Unlike Farah's trembling vulnerability, Nadia's confession came out like a battle cry. She wasn't broken, she was furious. And that fury had driven her to unite with Farah, despite their contrasting natures, to confront the situation together. The narrator sat frozen, torn between sympathy and disbelief. The weight of what both aunts were saying pressed heavily on their chest. Two marriages in crisis, two women in pain. And now both of them had placed their trust in one person, the narrator. The strangest part was not just the similarity of their stories, but the eerie way the patterns mirrored each other. Both men had excuses for staying out late, both had grown distant and defensive, and both carried an air of secrecy that could no longer be brushed aside. For the narrator, the confession was overwhelming. These were their aunts, women they had admired, who had always seemed strong and unshakable. Now they were sitting before them, vulnerable and broken, asking silently for help, guidance, or at least understanding. By the end of their confessions, the narrator's life felt irreversibly altered. They had been dragged into the heart of a secret that was bound to explode, and no matter what came next, there was no going back. After the air had grown thick with confessions, the narrator expected the next step to be something simple, perhaps advice, or even just the chance for the aunts to vent their pain aloud. Maybe they wanted comfort, reassurance, or a gentle reminder that suspicions didn't always equal truth. But as the silence deepened, and as both women leaned forward with a strange look of determination, the narrator realized they hadn't come merely to unburden themselves. They had come with a plan, and they wanted help. It was Aunt Nadia who spoke first. With her characteristic boldness, she looked directly at the narrator and said, "We need you to find out the truth." At first, the narrator didn't understand. Find out? How? But Nadia clarified without hesitation. They wanted the narrator to act as their eyes and ears, to confirm once and for all if their suspicions were correct. The words hit like a punch. The narrator blinked, struggling to grasp what was being asked. It wasn't just listening anymore. It was active participation. They wanted the narrator to follow their husbands, track their movements, and collect evidence. Aunt Farah, quieter but equally desperate, added her own plea. She said she couldn't live with uncertainty any longer. Her health, her peace of mind, even her dignity were crumbling under the weight of doubt. She needed proof one way or another. The narrator's stomach turned. They were family, not a private investigator. The thought of sneaking around, spying on uncles they had grown up respecting felt impossible, even wrong. Yet the pleading in Farah's eyes and the fiery urgency in Nadia's made it clear they weren't going to back down. And as if that weren't enough, Nadia pressed further. She suggested that the narrator could also test the husbands online, create a fake account, message them, and see if they took the bait. The audacity of the idea shocked the narrator. It wasn't just about observing anymore, it was about entrapment, luring their uncles into revealing their disloyalty. The narrator's mind raced with conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was guilt at the mere thought of deceiving family, of inserting themselves into marriages that weren't theirs to mend or break. On the other, there was empathy. Both aunts looked broken in their own ways, clinging to this request as their last chance for answers. To say no felt like betrayal, like leaving them stranded in their pain. Caught in the middle, the narrator tried to stall, asking whether such drastic steps were necessary. But Nadia's voice was firm. "We need to know. And you're the only one we can trust." That final sentence weighed heavier than anything else. It wasn't just a request. It was a demand cloaked in desperation. The narrator realized with a sinking feeling that refusing might fracture the fragile trust their aunts had placed in them. Reluctantly, with a hesitant nod, they agreed. In that moment, they crossed an invisible line, stepping into a role they had never imagined, unwilling detective in the dangerous world of infidelity. The narrator's reluctant agreement marked the beginning of a chapter they could never have imagined for themselves. What started as a simple family conversation had now become a covert mission, one filled with secrecy, tension, and the unsettling knowledge that they were about to pry into lives that had once seemed ordinary and safe. The next few days felt surreal. The narrator could barely focus on their own routine because every moment was shadowed by the knowledge of what they had promised to do. At first, the investigation felt awkward and clumsy. The narrator wasn't a professional detective after all. But with the guidance of Aunt Nadia, who had a knack for bold ideas, and Aunt Farah, who supplied the smallest details of her husband's routines, the plan took shape. They would monitor movements, quietly note inconsistencies, and even attempt to cross paths with their uncles in places they weren't supposed to be. The first real breakthrough came one late evening when the narrator followed Uncle Tariq, Aunt Farah's husband. Supposedly working late at the office, he instead drove across town to a quiet hotel. The narrator's stomach tightened as they watched him disappear inside, the truth becoming harder to deny. No files, no paperwork, just secrecy cloaked in darkness. Soon after, the same patterns emerged with Uncle Samir, Nadia's husband. He was spotted at upscale restaurants, dining with someone the narrator couldn't clearly see but knew wasn't his wife. The receipts Nadia had discovered now made sense. The image of him laughing at a table with a woman while his wife sat at home simmering with suspicion burned itself into the narrator's mind. As the evidence grew, so did the narrator's inner turmoil. Recording details in a small notebook, snapping photos from a distance, and reporting back to their aunts. It all felt heavy, like carrying a bag of stones. Each revelation was painful, not just for Farah and Nadia, but for the narrator, who now felt complicit in exposing something that would shatter their family. Aunt Farah reacted to the discoveries with quiet devastation. Each update drained her further, her eyes hollowing as she came face to face with what she had feared but hoped was untrue. Nadia, by contrast, grew fiercer with each confirmation. Her anger hardened into resolve, her determination to confront her husband gaining strength as the pieces of betrayal came together. But it wasn't just the actions of the uncles that unsettled the narrator, it was the eerie similarities. The hotel visits, the guarded phones, the same evasive excuses. It was almost as if the two men were living parallel double lives, walking the same path of secrecy. That strange mirroring gnawed at the narrator, whispering that there might be something even more sinister tying the two stories together. By the end of this phase of the investigation, the narrator was exhausted, emotionally frayed, and increasingly afraid of what would happen when the truth could no longer be contained. Each step forward felt like tiptoeing toward an explosion waiting to happen, and deep down, the narrator knew the most shocking part was yet to come. By the time the narrator had gathered enough evidence, the weight of the secrets felt unbearable. Every photo, every scribbled note in their pocket notebook, every late-night drive to tail their uncles added another layer of dread. Both aunts were now waiting anxiously, expecting the narrator to deliver the truth that would either shatter their hearts or, by some miracle, set them free from suspicion. The narrator dreaded the moment when they would finally have to reveal everything. But the truth was impossible to ignore any longer. It started with a piece of evidence that seemed almost insignificant. While following Uncle Tariq one evening, the narrator noticed the same woman they had seen earlier with Uncle Samir. At first, the narrator brushed it off, assuming it was coincidence. But as the nights passed and the investigations continued, the pattern became undeniable. Both uncles were seeing the exact same woman. The realization hit the narrator like a thunderclap. This wasn't two separate affairs running parallel, it was one tangled web with the same center. The mysterious woman, whose face was now etched in the narrator's mind, was the link between both betrayals. The shock of it made the narrator's knees weak. The family wasn't dealing with just infidelity. It was a shared betrayal, a grotesque overlap that made the situation even more poisonous. How could they tell their aunts this? How could they break the news that the men they had loved for years were not only unfaithful, but unfaithful with the same woman? The revelation threatened not only their marriages, but also the sisters-in-law's relationship with each other. What if this truth sparked resentment between them, each feeling their suffering was somehow tied to the other's? Despite the narrator's hesitation, Nadia pushed hard for the evidence. She demanded answers, certain she could handle whatever came her way. Farah, though quieter, whispered that she needed closure no matter how painful. Left with no choice, the narrator shared the truth. Slowly, carefully, they laid out the photos, the notes, and the final shocking piece, the confirmation that both men were entangled with the same woman. The room exploded with emotion. Nadia's face flushed crimson with rage, her voice rising as she paced back and forth, spitting out curses at the betrayal and humiliation. Farah, by contrast, broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably, the fragile thread of hope she had been clinging to finally snapping. The two women, though devastated, clung to each other in the storm of revelation, their grief shared and amplified by the cruel coincidence. The narrator sat frozen, feeling like the unwilling messenger of destruction. They had known the truth would hurt, but seeing the women they loved fall apart was more painful than they could have imagined. And yet, there was also a strange resilience forming between the aunts. Their pain, though raw and consuming, seemed to forge a stronger bond between them, an unspoken understanding that they were in this together. For the narrator, the revelation marked the point of no return. The truth was out, the wounds were open, and the fallout had only just begun. The storm had arrived, and nothing in the family would ever be the same. The revelation left the family shaken, like a house whose foundations had suddenly cracked. The moment the truth spilled out, it could not be contained again. Both aunts, though devastated in different ways, decided they could no longer live under the shadow of suspicion. The very next step was confrontation, and the narrator, though reluctant, was drawn into the emotional battlefield that followed. When Aunt Nadia confronted her husband, her fiery nature blazed through. She slammed the evidence on the table, photos, receipts, and the damning truth that he and Tariq were seeing the same woman. Her words cut like knives as she demanded answers. Uncle Samir tried to deny it at first, his face shifting from anger to panic, but the evidence was irrefutable. What followed was an eruption of shouting, accusations, and bitter truths spilling out after years of secrecy. Nadia's fury left no room for reconciliation. Her marriage was fractured beyond repair. For Aunt Farah, the confrontation was quieter but no less devastating. She wept openly as she showed Tariq what she knew, her voice trembling as she asked why he had betrayed her trust. Tariq had no convincing defense, only weak excuses and half-hearted apologies. Farah, unlike Nadia, did not respond with rage, but with a kind of mournful silence. She withdrew into herself, realizing that the man she had once trusted with her whole heart was now a stranger. The two aunts, though shattered by betrayal, found unexpected strength in each other. Instead of turning on one another as the narrator had feared, they grew closer, bound together by the shared wound. Their conversations shifted from despair to solidarity, each encouraging the other to stand tall despite the heartbreak. They leaned on each other in ways they never had before, their bond deepening as their marriages unraveled. The narrator, however, was left in an uneasy position. They had played the role of investigator, truth-bearer, and reluctant witness to the collapse of two marriages. Watching their aunts cry, rage, and rebuild themselves made them question whether they had done the right thing. Was it kinder to reveal the truth no matter how cruel, or would ignorance have been more merciful? That moral dilemma lingered in their heart like a shadow. In the weeks that followed, the family landscape changed. The uncles, once respected and trusted, were now marked by shame. Gatherings felt colder, quieter, as if the unspoken truth weighed on everyone present. Yet through the rubble, the narrator noticed something remarkable. Farah and Nadia were stronger. Betrayed, yes, but also free. Free from doubt, free from living a lie. As the narrator reflected on everything, they realized how much one request had changed their life. A knock at the door had pulled them into a web of secrets, deceit, and pain, but it had also taught them something profound. The truth, no matter how destructive, has a way of clearing the fog. It hurts, it breaks, but it also forces healing. The story closed not with resolution, but with resilience. The marriages may not have survived, but the women, once divided by personality and distance, were now united by truth, their bond stronger than betrayal.